Is preparing to live stream. We're getting beamed up. All right, y'all ready? Oh man, the chat is going off. Oh, that's you. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. All right,
Preparing to live stream. We're getting beamed up. All right.
Oh wow. Okay. Let's take that off so that we don't get the feedback. Um, you mind checking on that, Leah? Let's see if it actually shows up on YouTube, and then we can spread the link around. Oh, copy streaming link. Well, thank you, Zoom.
Yeah. Well, you don't put that.
In the channel.
Oh,
And of course, the thumbnail is my face looking crazy.
Yep, I got you, buddy.
Awesome. All right.
Oh, do your background. Change your.
So, all right. I want to kick this off. I want to first say thank you to all the panelists to showing up. I know you have busy schedules. I know you had a lot going on. And two, to the attendees, thank you, everyone. I know with everything going on regarding the George Floyd protests, you could be outside doing exactly that. But I would also be irresponsible if I did not point out that today is voting day. So if you have not voted, go do that. And if you live in New York, they have absentee voting, so you can definitely do that from the mail. So we definitely implore you to take advantage of the American political system to change our neighborhoods for the better. So without further ado, let's jump into it. This is Life After Boot Camp, where we focus on essentially those who have went through it and found some success within the industry and actually found a job. And these people have vastly different backgrounds. And I really want to get into that from the perspective of Ann Kettles. And please tell us how you went from being a director of client services to a talented developer. Please let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everyone. So my background is in marketing and client services. I started my career in the DC area, working for a government contractor doing marketing, and then moved up to New York and started working at Indeed, kind of fell into client services, and then just stayed because I kept getting promoted and worked my way up to director. And then I hit a point in my life where I really wanted to think about my future and what I wanted to do moving forward. I wanted to really start a family. And I realized that the next step in my career, which would have been a senior director, just wasn't for me. So I started thinking about roles that would allow me, the same flexibility that I was receiving as a director, where I could move to, whatever office or whatever location they had an office in. I was not willing to compromise on salary. I really wanted a high salary just to maintain the lifestyle that I had built. And then I wanted something that was a little bit more challenging. I was putting out a lot of fires, but I just felt I wasn't growing. And so did a lot of networking. That's what I do in my spare time. And I actually found a mentor who she was a software engineering manager for Condé Nast, and she kind of introduced me to the world of code. So kind of did it as a hobby, and then she helped me realize that I could, do it full time. So that's how I kind of got into coding.
Awesome. You work in the room nicely.
Yeah.
So that actually brings me to my next point. One of the, in my personal opinion, one of the biggest points to getting somebody from A to B in terms of boot camp to job is interacting with the community, as you said, which you did very nicely. And for that reason, I want to switch over to Alwina, who really has much experience in finding her own people from a POC perspective, from a women's group perspective, just getting in there. So really tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so hi everyone, Alwina here. So from the first time I got into learning about coding and so forth, I was presented with a list of all these women focused groups to kind of connect with. And from there, it literally ballooned into so many other opportunities to connect with women and people of color. And in fact, I found We Build Black through my former coworker, Chris, who was also part of We Build Black. I went to the Maven IO in 2018. And that's how I became more comfortable with, just like connecting with people in the POC community. And of course, continue doing more community work by even going to Grace Hopper Conference, and just really connecting with people also on Twitter. Like, it's when you connect with people in all these different places, it connects you even more. And by the time you just have like all these cool friends in the tech community. It's like so awesome. And another one that I'll shout out is Code Newbies. That's like one of the OG communities that I'm part of.
Definitely Code Newbies. And I absolutely agree with you when you say, you start to build up that little network, and then you go to events and you see, the people that you saw before, and you're like, oh snap, I'm really building my own little personal circle of like people who understand what, I'm going through and can teach me and It's what's up. I definitely understand. So that's going to move me into my next point. The job process, like literally finding it, that's what it seems like you relied heavily on your network. Wilfred, you had a very different process, and I'm curious like how you went about actually finding that job.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Wilfred Ruck. I went to App Academy. One of the biggest things I learned from like processing, from going from a boot camp to the actual job that I have now, is it took a lot of time and patience. That's one thing that people need to make sure they have, because if you don't have that, you're gonna burn out. You're gonna crash, and so you need patience. You need to have a buddy. You need to have somebody, maybe one or two people that can bounce ideas off of. Gaining a lot of like experience. So like when they go to interviews and they come back, you guys can talk about that, and that gives you more projects to work on. And those are things that really helped me as long as I kept coding. If you stop coding, then you start losing it. You start losing that faith. And it's really tough to go from a boot camp to a job, because you feel like, there's a lot of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of feeling like you're not going to make it, so
Absolutely.
Just keeping going, keep creating, being around people that support you. Support is the biggest thing, people that believe in you. And ultimately what ended up allowing me to get that job was patience and perseverance after a lot of hurdles that I hit, a lot of hurdles.
So you're one of those people that definitely know about patience. And for those that don't know, Wilfred went through multiple stages. He went through a boot camp, and then he was also a boot camp instructor before getting his job. Right. Mm-hmm. So he definitely knows about taking it through the stages, taking your time with it to make sure that your craft is on point. And even more so, I would like you to talk a little bit more about that, imposter syndrome, or if anybody here has had imposter syndrome and how you went about dealing with it. Yeah, anybody take that question, for sure.
I imagine we all got something for that, because no one writes code and doesn't have it, even like, and has any measure of self-awareness, right? Like, there's two major things that help me with any form of it. And like, I was working as a consultant at Thoughtbot, right? Thoughtbot's a consultancy. People hire us to come in as experts to build them custom software. We make all of the decisions, all of the recommendations. I started doing that like straight out of, or a couple months out of boot camp. So like, I had to come in and either answer questions confidently or say to someone like, I don't have an answer for you right now, but I'll get back to you. But like, my whole business was be an expert. And really, that's like the thing that helped me manage the like, I don't know any of this. What is just forgiving myself for that, because it's a huge field. Like, of course, you don't know everything that there is to know in it. You're not going to. You're never going to. You're going to like developers who've been at things for 20 years, they don't know the things that more recent grads do, because they're not actually they're not keeping up with those new technologies in the same way. So even coming fresh out of something, like that freshness as a newer grad who's actively learning what's new and latest, like is a unique and valued knowledge. So like, yeah, just remembering everybody's got these large wells of ignorance.
Absolutely. So
ask for help finding the answers.
I'm curious, how long do you think it took you to actually get to that point to know that you don't know everything and you will never know everything?
Yeah, it took me actually being formally written up 4 months into my job. Like thought about how to formal apprentice, or 5 months. I guess it was 4 months after graduating my apprenticeship. So I had a 4-month apprenticeship where I was like where people weren't paying for my time. So it was cool that I didn't know things and I was working on my own. And then like 4 months into that, like it was like, hey, you're producing things too slowly. And like you're getting the things done, but it's taking way too long. And like it was a really hard and really important corner for me to turn, and actually like being good at my first job to recognize that it wasn't an assessment of whether or not if I could figure everything out. It was that I could produce code, and like knowing when to tap someone else or flag someone and be like, yo, I'm spinning my wheels on this. I could figure it out in like a day, but like you also know this off the top of your head. Can you help me? Was like a transformational point for me. And like a thing I had to build like actual discrete skills for.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I would just second that, just because especially what Derek said about knowing when to tap out and knowing when to ask for help. I mean, even today, I still have a lot of imposter syndrome, just because coming from a role where I was the person that was making the decisions, or like people coming to me for the answers. And it's very, very hard switching over to, you don't know the answer, but you have to realize that nobody really knows the answer. And that's what engineers are paid to do. They're paid to figure it out. So, so like even the other day, I was tasked with something I had no idea how to do it. And I just had to, bite my tongue and then just ask someone that I knew how to do it in order to get it done. So it's hard. It's something that you have to continue to practice. And I think it's just something that you're going to have to be aware of, and don't let that affect your work.
No, I definitely agree. And I'm glad that you said that, you acknowledge that, because it is a very powerful thing for people who haven't gotten that first job yet to hear that us who are employed still go through that, because it is a very real thing. Like, I just recently got okay with making it a part of my process of going through the get blame when I really don't know something, and then hitting the person up who wrote that code, right? Yeah, Derek is like, oh my God, yeah, because you understand, like you kind of want to take that good hour or two to figure it out yourself, but it's like you said, Derek, like if you could just hit the person up and be like, yo, can you spend 5 minutes to like explain this? You can be in a much better place. So I appreciate that, Anne, for coming forward and having that confession. Is there anybody else that want to talk about their imposter syndrome?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing also is like like you said, everybody has imposter syndrome, even as you have more experience and more years on you. I specifically, when I came on to Blade, I was the only engineer that was new. Everybody else was senior engineers. So one thing that I realized, it actually took me a couple months to realize this, but I was comparing myself constantly to senior engineers who've done this for years. And that could be a good thing because I learn a lot from them. I look at their code. I'm like, okay, I gotta do something like that. I gotta refactor and do something like that. But at the same time, it really killed me mentally, because I was always second guessing everything I was doing. And I also had that problem of, do I ask for help, or do I just like figure it out on my own so I don't seem like a noob or someone who doesn't know what they're doing? So I think to come off of what Derek said, like knowing when to ask for help, and just understanding that everybody doesn't know everything, and we have to ask help when we need it, and you're gonna get through it.
Oh, sorry, I just realized. Yeah, no, absolutely, I definitely agree. Alwina, do you have any thoughts? Because I actually have a question for you. But if you want to talk about your imposter syndrome, I'm all here for it.
I'm open to whichever question.
So you actually had an experience where you met up with ThoughtWorks at prior conference, right? And you actually now work there, right? So I'm curious because I've went through this myself from a perspective of like reaching out to people like face to face to ask like a recruiter for a job. What are those like weird moments that you go through? It's like, oh, they're kind of busy, because I've been there. Like I've been at iHeartRadio where I wanted a job and the recruiter's right there, but I'm like, but he's kind of talking, making every excuse not to just go over there. What really like allowed you to get over that hump in your mind? Be like, nah, this is happening. I'm gonna ask for it because this is my job. Like that's meant for me.
So just to preface, my whole situation has been like super unique. I had already been in my coding boot camp. I went to Flatiron school, or still technically in Flatiron school, while working full time. And at some point I quit my job last year and I just said, you know what, after I finish this next project, I'm going to start looking for jobs. By this time, I had already gotten a like full ride to the Grace Hopper conference this past October. So when I came back from abroad, I went to Grace Hopper conference, and ThoughtWorks was already in the back of my mind as a company that I wanted to like check out as far as just working there. Didn't know a ton about them, didn't know that they were a global company, but just was like, they seem interesting, so let me check them out. Went to the desk to get more information. They were like, come back, we might have like interview slots. Came back the next day, got an interview slot, did amazing at that. Went the following week, the recruiter reached out to me about an interview. I went to Chicago for the interview, and then I didn't hear anything for like 2 months because, to be honest with you, I actually bombed the technical interview. But they saw something in me and said, we want you to work there. And they gave me a second chance, and I did a coding challenge, and 4 months later, I am there. So like I said, I have a very unique situation. It was really the only like company that I actually like put in my resume for and interviewed for that I got. So not everyone is going to have that same situation, but understanding it is possible. But before then, yes, I would reach out to people and just to, you know, ask questions and learn more about what people are doing at their respective company. Because, you know, like that's how you get started. You have to do informational interviews to interact with folks and just see what's happening out there. You know, it just doesn't happen to you like miraculously, not like me anyway, but just in general, it just doesn't happen like that.
So one interesting thing I think you noted was the fact that you knew that ThoughtWorks was one of the people on your list, right? And I think that's one of the things that can definitely help people when they're trying to figure out how to get from point A to B, right? Is because having a target actually helps you, you know, kind of visualize the situation. And one thing I like to always say is that if you can't visualize yourself somewhere, then you will never get there, right? So a perfect example is one of our founders, Chloe. Like she wanted to be a Shopify, she got there. As soon as she came out of Grace Hopper, she knew what she wanted and she got there. Two, and well, it makes me think like, what about discovery kind of made that decision for you? You know, like what when you sat down during the interview, did you hear something that you liked? Did you actually research them and say, okay, this company is interesting from like a technology standpoint? Like, what made that decision for you?
Yeah, I focused on benefits first. Again, I was thinking about the
I
next.
hear you. I hear you.
I was thinking I really wanted to start a family. I wanted the flexibility, etc. So I focused on the companies that could provide me the benefits that I was looking for. And actually, all of my interviews that I received, they were all through networking. I never filled out an application for them. All the companies that I did fill out an application for, I got denied immediately. So that's my suggestion for anybody. As especially coming from Indeed, recruiters really depend on applicant tracking systems, and if you don't check off all their boxes, your resume is going to go in a black hole. So up to like throughout my entire boot camp, I was at Grace Hopper. I was very vocal about my journey and just like let people in on my journey from start to finish. And so I had a lot of people who were willing to, you know, refer me or reach out to people that they knew were hiring. And so that's how I got all my interviews. But yeah, so that's why I chose Discovery. Ultimately was just, I really liked their benefits. I really liked how they were a family first company, and yeah. And I really liked the projects that I would be working on.
That's what's up. I mean, that support group is a very real thing. And speaking of support, Wilfred, I'm curious on some of your thoughts regarding, pair programming and how that can be used as maybe a tool set, along with, say, like code fights or whatever you're using for your job interview process.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I learned from helping other people code and from being a teacher is that you get to learn from them as well. Like I didn't know, I didn't know about all their projects that they were working on, but just from looking at it, I got to get experience from a different perspective. So that was always a good thing I was able to get from that. And then also peer programming allows you to learn new skills, learn new shortcuts, and just like bouncing, like I said before, bouncing ideas off of each other, you're allowed to get new ways to create new solutions. And that's something I did, especially when, like I said, you come back from an interview, you go with your friends, and you put this is literally what I did. I put the solution on the board, and they critique. Okay, I would do it this way. I would have done it this way. You get to learn different ways to do things, and you all learn how to get better for the future.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the keys to being a good programmer, is being open to that critique, right? And just knowing that, as Derek said. Oh, Derek, come in. What's up?
Oh yeah. So pairing, I'm a big fan of pairing, especially for learning, or like coming out and switching over gears around, like out of boot camp. Like one of the things Wilfred's discussing is like an accountability network and workshopping. And like, here's the thing I did. Here's how I did it. Here's how we can make it better. And so it sounds like what you were naming, Wilfred, was like a code review of interviews, right? Like in that same sort of flow.
Exactly.
One of the major benefits of pair programming, both with people on your own level or people who are not on your relative level, either above or below, is that it makes you get way better at explaining your thought process around code. So like, and like there's a lot of different ways and tactics for pairing, but when pairing, like making sure that you don't type something unless your pair understands and agrees what you're doing means you have to be really clear in explaining your thought process. And that ability to communicate, like in words, what you want to say in code is actually a core skill for both interviewing and working as a like highly effective software engineer.
Absolutely.
So like, yeah, that's a huge just skill, even like with your accountability group. I'm also a big proponent of asking people who have offered to mentor you in some capacity if they'll pair with you for an hour.
100%.
Yeah, that's a transformative thing, because they'll like show you a handful of tools and you'll be like, I had no idea I can make my editor do this.
100% agree. So one of the things that I want to point out that both of you are saying is that there are literally two benefits to the different sides of pair programming, because I don't want, when people hear pair programming, I don't want them to think that you always have somebody who is, more quote unquote skilled in the subject or knowledgeable, sitting down with you, walking through maybe sorry, my cats are all the way. But yeah, I don't want, these people to think that it's always about, from a mentor perspective, because at the end of the day, like you just said, you're always growing. So at some point you are going to be the mentor in a pair programming perspective, and you need to take advantage of that so that you know how to communicate certain things, right? Like you said, Wilfred was saying before that him being in a instructor position, doing a lot of that programming, actually put him in a position to explain things from a non-technical perspective, because you need to do that sometimes. So that's definitely, whenever you pair program, try to do things from both sides to be able to measure yourself at the end of the day. So now I want to keep going with you, Derek, real quick, and talk about your experience over at ThoughtBot. And because you have a very long history at ThoughtBot, and it just, I want to talk about that. But not only that, how you even got to the position that you're in as a quote unquote senior developer.
So I came into ThoughtBot through their apprenticeship program. They had a formal apprenticeship program. That's part of why I went. And so like that the context of that program was you come in, you pair with billing developers right away, like, and work with them on what they're doing and learn their processes and their flows. And then you take what you're learning and build your own like breakable toy where you can just experiment with stuff. Like that's their, by and large, that's their apprenticeship model. And so like I came in through that. I mentioned earlier that like I went through the apprenticeship, was starting to work on projects. 4 months into my like time being billable, I got put on like a disciplinary review for being too slow. And so like I feel like that's the thing I always like to include when talking about like my 3+ year career at Thoughtbot, because it's really easy to hit a wall too in programming or in a career and be like, oh man, I can't do this. And like I was on the process that people use to create a legal paper trail so they can fire you and not have a discrimination suit. Like that's what a formal review is here, right? And like I finished that, made it out of that successfully, learned a bunch. And then I want to say 6 months after that, Thoughtbot basically recognized that their apprenticeship program was having a lot of these sorts of problems where people weren't performing well enough out of them. So they introduced a title of a developer and a concept of a senior developer to like kind of smooth that, but there used to just be flat. So then they introduced the concept of a senior dev. Me and my team lead started talking about whether or not we could do it or like how we get there. And then like 3 months later, we were like, you're doing all of these things. So like, then I got promoted into that. And then like they later created a position of team lead, which is effectively like, it's a senior developer role where you're delivering code independently, but also mentoring and formally conducting one-on-ones. And so like helping other devs like iron out problems with their projects or like build up their skills or vision out their career. And so like I also like we rolled that out and I was like, yeah, I can do this. And they were like, yeah, you're right. And so I got promoted into that too. And Thoughtbot San Francisco actually shut down in April because of COVID. So like I'm starting a new role as a senior engineer at the end of the month.
Remote?
Yeah. Everything's remote, but it's remote indefinitely. Yes.
Yeah, got it. All right. So it is about to hit 7 o'clock. I want to get into the Q&A because there is a good amount of people who've been hitting the Slack chat and the Twitter. You actually just answered a couple questions regarding apprenticeship. Rachel, if you have anything, specific about apprenticeships, you want to know, definitely put that in there. We'll see if we can get to that. One of the questions that I found interesting was, aside from bootcamp projects, were there any portfolio projects that you worked on, on the side and that helped your interview?
Well, I will say, so how I got the discovery interview is my boyfriend, he worked at Stack Overflow. And so I used to go over there and take advantage of their free lunch. I was in boot camp. I was out of a job. And so I had brought I always brought my laptop and I was just constantly coding. I was refactoring a project to TypeScript just for fun. And while sitting in the coffee bar, one of the people who sat next to me, she was asking me what I was doing. And I told her all about React and the things that I was doing. I stopped referring to myself as a student at that point. I was always introducing myself as an engineer, again, just to try to get over this imposter syndrome, because I had already built an app. So at that point, felt I could call myself an engineer. And from that 15-minute meeting, she then went off into the world and she met up with her mentor who said that he was looking for a React developer. And she was like, oh, I just met this girl. She loves React. She's great at it. And then so she connected us and then we started having coffee chats and then he just said, hey, I'm just going to bring you in for an interview. So I would say that's how I got into it, and that's the only other project. I also went to a lot of hackathons. I went to the it's the Beyonce themed one. I can't remember what it's called.
What? Tell me more
Yeah,
about
there's a Beyonce themed hackathon. I go, what is it? Flawless hacks.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
everybody Google that. Check that out. That's seems to be fun.
Yeah.
That's crazy. All right. Did anybody here sign up for freelance work after boot camp? And did it help with completing if you did, how was it completing projects on your own? And if you had a group when you're working on these freelance projects, we can talk about that as well.
I guess I could talk about that a little bit. I didn't do a freelance project after the bootcamp. I did a freelance project before bootcamp, oddly. But one of the experiences that I realized when I did that was you don't have anybody to really rely on. Or at least at that time, I was very super new to coding. So how I got the opportunity was even a blessing. But when I did it, you don't really have anybody to lean against. So I had to use the internet a lot. So one thing I got good at is learning how to debug, because no one else had my problems when I was creating that platform. So I had to keep learning how to debug and learning how to research. And the key to researching is knowing what to search, not just searching anything, because the answer is out there. You just have to learn how to search for it. So that's one of the pain points, and one of the benefits from working alone is you get to learn how to overcome and gain experience doing stuff like that.
Absolutely. Does anybody else want to jump in? I have a story if nobody else does.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of what Wilfred said. When I did my projects for Flatiron School, while you do have like people to reach out to, 99% of the time you're kind of like figuring it out on your own. And so a lot of the time I would Google answers or questions for issues that I was having, and whether it be something happened in my setup or whatever. And that's how I like learned to figure out things. And then I had to just keep like a running log of all the things that I Googled. So that way, if I had this issue again, I could just refer to like Evernote or something, just so that I can remember this is what happened. So yes, I will always tell you, if you have an issue in your terminal, Google the actual error. Why? Because other people had the same issue, and it's on there in the interwebs somewhere.
Googling like a real
Use
developer.
Error codes.
Yes.
Look at the error code. If you go to Google, copy and paste the error message, because that'll be a plain text explanation of it. Like eventually, like learning how to like actually read technical docs is an invaluable skill, and like gets a lot easier the more you do it. So when like what I built a practice of when I hit something I didn't know was like looked at the answer, and then if the answer said like let's say I was trying to debug why an element wasn't showing up on the page in terms of CSS, and like it was like, and the answer is like, hey, you need to use position relative instead of position absolute, then like I go look up the CSS position property and like read the docs on it at that point, because then you actually build the larger understanding of how things work and get to practice making sense of technical documentation with something you already kind of understand. So you can be like, oh, bet this is how they say this set of things. Mm-hmm. Got it.
Yeah, and definitely getting used to reading documentation is key. Wilfred, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to say, to jump on that, if you don't find the answer and you find your own solution on your own, feel free to put that online. We are a community. If you don't put that online, you're going to probably run into that error again and be like, damn, what was that solution again? And then, just think about the people that come before you. That's all.
I really hope that YouTube is catching all of our like faces so that they can see Derek just like cheering people on. I need that. I do want to let and kind of put a story out there regarding freelance. In my experience, when I was going to boot camp, I was learning Python and Django, and I chose that because I did try Ruby and it didn't exactly click with me. Python was obviously just like more English for me. So it just clicked with me a lot more. So at some point, I think I was working like at night during like my 9 to 5 boot camp. And then on Saturdays, I still wanted to be able, or just in general, the weekend, still wanted to be able to like flex my skills and like keep learning. So what I did, I started looking around for people who already had a development shop, right? And I could ask them questions like, yo, like, well, how did you go about starting this? Like, how'd you find clients? Da, da, da. And I ended up finding somebody called Scenic, like it's like scene with NYC at the end, and they were like a development shop in the Bronx. And just in the middle of the conversation of like him being nice enough to answer my questions, he was like, "You want a job?" I was like, "Yeah." Of course, he's like, it is Ruby on Rails. I don't care. Give me the job. Let's, I took myself every Saturday and possibly Sunday, depending on whether he needed me, to the warehouse. And lucky enough, he actually had another developer, a Nigerian guy, they're working on Ruby on Rails. We definitely had our like Black developer unite moment, so it was really cool. Like you never know what will happen just from you doing your own research and talking to people. Like half of my experiences come from literally just going on LinkedIn and asking people, can I talk to you? Like it's a numbers game. Somebody's gonna say yes,
Yeah, like I just want to tack onto that real quick. And like the distilled version of it is people like to help people. Like, so if you ask someone if they can help, if like they can do something, and like you're not presumptuous about it, and that part's important, like you're not entitled to anyone's help, but if you give them the opportunity to help you, like they get to feel good about it afterwards. So they're inclined to say yes. And like on the flip side of that, when people like say like, hey, feel free to like contact me if you go to like an event or a talk or whatever. Like I've given life after boot camp talks at boot camps. And like at the end of it, I gave out business cards, wrote my info on the board and said, contact me with questions. And like, it's a group of 20 people and only 2 people would hit me up. Like, so like, you're not going to drown someone. Like if you're like, people are making genuine offers to help because they want to.
No, I definitely 100% agree. So I 100% impress on everybody here watching. Go and ask for help for as many people as you possibly can. Like, and I'm gonna just let you know, like, most of my sponsorships for events come from doing that. Like, literally just asking. I met the CEO of Treehouse off LinkedIn. I just hit the guy with a message, and he took 30 minutes out of his time to be like, "Hey, let's talk." You know what I mean? You never know who you will meet by literally just sending that message. It doesn't cost you anything. So let me dig into these questions. Do we have anything else? Is there any other?
Everything else is in Slack.
Okay. I think Derek, I don't know if you want to touch on this again. She was saying, Rachel had a question that she wants to know what the application process was like for your apprenticeship, and did you begin this just after boot camp or while in it? How long did it last? She got a line of questions right here.
I can give a rundown on that process. So like, I think a thing that's ThoughtBot had a known publicly available apprenticeship, but they also didn't publicize the apprenticeship explicitly, right? Like, because it just would flood with applications.
Right.
And like, so that kind of leads me to a principle that I think about when I tell people who are like, yo, I'm trying to figure out how to make my way out of boot camp. People don't have entry-level jobs. They make them for people they decide they want to help grow. So like the process that ThoughtBot used for their apprenticeship is effectively the same process that they use for hiring a more senior developer. They're just like, they just look at how you're doing, how you're answering them, what your knowledge is, and in the case of consulting, how well you communicate that knowledge, because that's key. And decide if they think like what you know and how you communicate it would let them bill an exorbitant amount of money for your time to a paying client in 3 months.
Very true.
But like that was mostly like the assessment process for that. And by exorbitant amount, what I actually mean is if you can become that expert in the requisite amount of time. Because it's like, yeah, it's expertise is in fact a valuable thing. And so it's like, can we get you enough of it that you can operate at this level, which ain't cheap, right?
Right.
So like, yeah, there's some of the other questions in that are a little tricky for me to answer without like explaining parts of the ThoughtBot like interview process that were proprietary.
Right.
Like I think it's worth noting, I basically came in through a community program that agreed to give a cohort of Black and Brown like people who went through Dev Bootcamp a mock interview. And those of us who like did well in the mock interview were invited to come back for a real interview. That's how I got in. So like I got in effectively through a mock interview.
Got you. All right. Well, hopefully that answers your question, Rachel. This one comes from Kelly Porter. It's just a general question. What resources did your boot camps provide for you once you graduated? If you took advantage of those resources, how do they help you navigate the job search?
I can talk on that. So one of the things that App Academy provided was the availability of mock interviews, whether that was technical or non-technical. That's something that helped a lot because some people are getting a lot of calls and interviews, some people are not. So if you're not, that's a good way to keep it going, and important to do before your interviews to make sure you're prepared. I didn't do too much of those because I would say organization is like number one. So I was very organized in keeping track of what I applied to, what stack they're using, just all the information I needed to prepare. So that's pretty much what the mock interview prepped you for, is how to prepare for an interview and check to see if you knew what you knew. But besides the mock interviews, I guess I would say I had a technical career coach that allowed me to keep on track with what I was doing. I was organized, but having a career coach allowed me to be even more organized, and he pushed pressure on me to apply to more jobs than I thought I should apply to. He put more pressure on me to revise my resume 10 times over. It was really annoying and I hated him for it. But at the end of the day, I thanked him for it because it all worked out in the end and it was worth it. So
That's right.
Yeah, my boot camp, I went to Grace Hopper, so part of Full Stack Academy. They offer career services, and it's mostly like, I guess, branding yourself on LinkedIn, introducing you to contacts and whatnot. I didn't take advantage of that just because I already had a pretty vast network on LinkedIn. What I did do, however, is I went to not only hackathons, I went to meetups. And then at a meetup, that's how I found an engineer who used to do the technical interviews for Microsoft. And so he agreed to meet with me weekly and just do mock interviews. And he gave me a lot of great advice and a lot of great feedback. And that really helped me feel prepared for any interview. So I would suggest like not only taking advantage of whatever your bootcamp offers, but really, again, like everyone else said, go out into the engineering community and find someone who's willing to do it, who's willing to work with you, because, you know, at least I can speak for us, like we really want to see more Black people in tech, Black and brown people in tech. So we will do whatever we can to help you out.
Well, I very much appreciate that. I, for one, would like more. So let me see. I believe we have one or two more.
I want to add one resource too, real quick.
Sure.
So we also had career coach and mock interviews. We had a subscription to a service called Front End Masters as well, which basically was high quality like tutorials for front end technologies and whatnot. And a career week that was like a bunch of resume revising and like working in small groups to identify things that we thought we wanted. And all that was super helpful. Front end masters in particular was good because one of the things that's hard outside of bootcamp is like figuring out what are good resources to keep learning from. And like a thing a mentor told me early on that like is that your biggest asset as a hire outside or coming out of a boot camp is your momentum and your rate of learning. So like as much as possible, keep that up, right? Like build new things, learn new things, watch tutorials, whatever it is, like do what you can to like make sure you're still learning things beyond what was in your bootcamp curriculum.
It's almost like a snowball effect, right?
Yeah. And like that's kind of like similar to what Ann was talking about. And I don't know if your bootcamp included React, but like you got in like basically by like being really clear and knowledgeable and like able to communicate what you knew and liked about React. And then someone was like, you need a React person? I know this person. And like the fact that you didn't actually have a lot of professional software development experience didn't matter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I did.
Go
ahead, Albina. No, bring it.
One thing I know that I think Flatiron does is you have to write a blog post on each of your projects. And so I think being able to write about what you've done in your projects is really helpful. I know one of my last blog posts I wrote was not so much on how I built my project, but some of the challenges and issues that came up in my project, because sometimes I think we're just so concerned about the process of building a project, but what about the things that happened while you were building the project that might be useful to someone as they are building their own similar project. So being able to share that and share what you did to overcome that challenge is useful, because you never know who sees that and then they're like, oh, okay, I can figure out how to do it from this. And it shows how you can share technical concepts as well, but in a written format.
Absolutely. And if everyone watching is noticing that everyone here has a different path, but generally they're saying the same things, just in a different way, right? So one of the things that Alwina is saying is that when you do make these blog posts about your project, similar to how Derek was talking about pair programming helps you to explain something, that is exactly what a blog post does. You put it on paper rather than the verbal. You're still explaining it, right? And then what Wilfred was saying before was like, we are a community. Like if you do not see that answer, put that out there. Don't assume because your project, you feel like, you're early on and your project won't mean anything to anybody. Put that out there. There might be somebody that learns from that, man. Like don't, assume that because you're at a certain level that you're not worth putting your project on the internet at the end of the day. Everything is worth it because we all started from somewhere. All right. So this question is a little bit more focused on the job itself. I'm sorry, at the companies where you work, do you find they are flexible and you have a good work-life balance? And just talk about, a little bit about that and what maybe if you had to fight for that, maybe per se, because of being a junior.
So I think I'm probably the most junior person here on the call. I think so far for my job, I have a pretty good work-life balance for the most part. I also am starting this job right around coronavirus happening. So that's a completely different experience in and of itself. But yeah, I definitely have a good work-life balance with my team. We do a lot of pair programming, but it's not like we're working till 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, unless that has to happen. But so far, I think we've only done it once. And that was just because I knew my teammate was going to be out the next day and just wanted to get the work done so that when he came back, or at least I could work on the next part of the project on my own the following day. So yeah, definitely a good work-life balance so far. But I will say that one thing is ThoughtWorks is known as being a company that has their consultants travel to the client site. How that's going to pan out for the next several months to a couple of years because of coronavirus, not really sure. But for now, I'm here in New York, and that's it. So
yeah, I would say I have some of my classmates, they have jobs where they are working 24/7, right? And I think it's, it could be because it's a startup, or it could be because that's the expectation of the role. So that's why I was a benefits first type of company. Like, I was interviewing them as much as they were interviewing me. And I wanted to make sure that, I was getting that flexibility that I wanted. So what I love about my job is how flexible it is. And there is no expectation to work outside of normal work hours. So I have a really great work-life balance, which I really appreciate. But I think it's not engineering as a whole. I think it's per company.
That 100% co-sign that.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I had good work-life balance because I prioritized that in the companies that I was willing to talk to and work with. So like, I got burned in my prior career in marketing, working for like a hyper growth startup with like completely unreasonable expectations. And I knew I was never going to do that again. But like, what Anne said about interviewing companies as much as they're interviewing you is a thing that I would really want to echo really hard for everyone else here too. Like, your first job is hard. It's not easy to get your first job in this field. And you want to like, it was really important to me to go someplace where I knew I could grow, where they would support me growing. And there's a handful of like hard questions that I'd ask during the interview process, and like things that I would look at to like gauge whether or not I felt like people worked too much, right? Because I didn't find it super effective to say like, yo, so how many hours a week do y'all tend to work? But like asking someone, hey, when was your last vacation and how'd you feel when you came back from it? Like, what was the process of catching up with the work that had happened while you were on vacation?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, how much vacation do people take usually? Like, if it's a place that has unlimited PTO. Those are all things that like I found super helpful. To kind of gauge what's going on with that. And there's questions that you can ask to help assess those sorts of things. There's also a website that someone who went to Dev Bootcamp a little bit before me built called keyvalues.io. It has a handful of like, it lets you say, here's a couple values I think are really important in the place I want to work. And then it gives you questions that like people have submitted that help suss that out in the interview process.
That's actually really cool. I'm looking at it right now. I'm learning something already. So once again, like Anne and Derek bringing up the excellent point of like, do your research on who you want to work for, right? Because all those things matter. Go ahead.
I forgot one super important part of that. Like, the hard part about remembering to interview places is like, but you're looking for your first job. Even though you're new, you have actual value to these places. Like, and going into interviews as though you believe that actually carries in how you interview and how people feel about potentially working with you, because you're not there like, oh, this is the thing I need it. Like, come in confident. It's like, yeah, cool. We're going to figure out if we should work together.
Right.
Like, do y'all get the privilege of working with me?
Right. I echo that very, very much, Derek. So that is one thing I made sure I did. Like, it took like 2 or 3 months into the job search process, till I realized like I need to interview guys just as much as you're interviewing me. So I would come to interviews, with everything, description of what they want, their key values. I'll make sure I have my key values and what I'm looking for as well. And that allowed you to feel less like you're being interviewed, like you're the only person that's being looked at. It's a two-way street. So that's very important. And to bounce off of what Ann said, in terms of work balance, it's really a communication thing. I think you need to make sure that's communicated up front. 2 weeks into my job, my CTO let me know, like, if you want to work remote, feel free, which was cool for him to say, but I did not work remote 2 weeks in because I wanted to be able to be there. I just started this job. Everybody's been here for a while. I want to make sure I made my presence known. Also, my job is more of a physical versus a product. I mean, versus more of like a internet product or something like that. So it made more sense to be there. and also just being new, I didn't feel comfortable working from home from the jump. But after a couple of months, I started getting more comfortable, and I asked less questions. It's easier to ask questions in person than online, so that's another bonus to it. But after I started asking less questions, I started taking on bigger projects on my own. That's when I was like, okay, I can start taking some days off. And then obviously when COVID-19 started, I'm just 100% remote now, and things are starting to get back to normal, but I don't know if I will go back. That's a question.
You're right.
But
well, keep safe, man. That's the important part. So, you know, everybody's bringing up an important points around a saying that I want to make sure everybody leaves here with, all the attendees. Essentially, what we are saying is know your worth. All right. When you get in there, know your worth in the interview. Regardless if you are a junior, newbie, whatever you want to call it, you have ample opportunity to be just as nice as everybody in this room at being a dev. Okay. So remember that. If I don't know if I got to put like 3 black clap emojis right here and it says, I'm a dope dev, know your worth. But remember that when you leave here.
And your newness is an asset.
Facts.
You are coming in as a fresh voice and a fresh perspective, and they need that. So like, it's the fact that you aren't already fully steeped in the way that everything already gets done is a good thing for them. It's not a thing you need to be apologetic about. It's a thing you just get to wear. Like, you need tall people, you need short people. Like, it's straight up just difference.
100%. So we have one more question from Shukri on Twitter, because we're about to hit 7:30, but definitely this is a really interesting question. Have you ever been invited for a behavioral interview that turned into a technical one? And I'm also curious if what your feelings and like approach to a behavioral interview is.
It wasn't, so my story is, it was very hard for me to shed my client services background. Recruiters kept wanting to put me back into that bucket. And even, you know, they saw that I was coding. They were like, great, you're coding. Maybe you could do half coding, half client facing. I still took those interviews, especially if they were companies that I was interested in, just because I was talking to a recruiter. So they would interview me, or they would it would be a phone screen for the client facing role. And then I would just be very upfront with them afterwards, like, thank you for considering me, but I'm not trying to talk to another client for the rest of my life. And then I would tell them about, you know, my journey and how I really want to get into software. I'm looking more towards 100% back of office, like technical roles. And if they have any open roles within their company, if they could please send me to that recruiter. And so that's how I was able to turn, I guess, roles that were client facing into more technical. That's how I got like my Google interview, because she passed me along to the software engineering recruiter for them. But in terms of going into a behavioral interview and then they just give me an algo to solve, I've never actually had that happen to me. But I think you should just always be prepared, I guess. Maybe. I don't know.
I wouldn't agree with that one. Like so there's 2 parts of that, right? Like, one is I do have a practice of asking whoever I'm coordinating with, like, what to expect in the interview. It's like, hey, what sort of question should I expect this to be? Like, and honestly, their recruiting ideally has that laid out. And then once you know that, if someone hits you with that, like with an algorithm, it's like, hey, I'm happy to talk about this at a different time. I was completely prepared for a behavioral interview, and the cognitive shift for that's going to be hard for me right now. Can we schedule a different, like you shouldn't be surprised by what's happening in your interview process. Mm-hmm. And like, if the interview process feels adversarial, that's not a good sign, and you should not you should say like, actually, this isn't it. Like,
yeah, I agree. And I do think that like, one thing to note is that maybe, you know, because people are new and they don't have that job yet, they are afraid to ask questions. But what we are saying is like, do not do that. Do not be afraid to put your foot down and like essentially let them know like this is weird. You did not say this beforehand. Like you're kind of ambushing me. This is awkward. I wasn't told whether it be data structures and algorithms or an app. Like where is this coming from? Like, you know. So Derek, you want to say something?
yeah, like, yeah, feel push back. Of course, be diplomatic, right? Doing like, hey, bro, what you doing out with this? What you talking about a graph for? I thought we were going to talk about. Someone actually specifically asked how we approach behavioral interviews too, so I'll probably will tackle that too. But like, don't again, keep it non-adversarial. Be like, hey, I wasn't prepared to do this today.
Mm-hmm.
Can we do this a different time?
Absolutely.
Or can we take like 5 minutes for me to go get set up and like make up a little fib if you need to. Say like, I have a specific place in my house I like to sit when I'm thinking through programming problems. Can I go like get that set up or go get in front of my whiteboard and like, can we do this again in 5 minutes or a half hour, whatever it is you need. But like, if you find the experience throws you, ask for time to back off and recenter yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically behavioral interviews, there's what's called the STAR method for behavioral interviews. And if you Google STAR behavioral interviews, you'll see it. But it's like situation, task, action, retention, maybe it is. What the situation is, something that's the T stands for, the action you took, and R, the results of it. So it's like you want to give the context for what happened, what the friction or rub there was, what thing you decided to do to address that issue, and then what result that produced. And it's okay for the results to not actually be a satisfactory one, so long as you can name that and say like, and this is what I learned from that not working out.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's, from my experience, what they're really looking for is to just make sure that you think from an engineer's perspective, like trying to find solutions to these problems, right? So we have, this is the last question, and I don't know if anybody has experience with this, but we'll find out. Does getting a tech role that does not say software engineer affect you getting a software engineering role in the future? Does anybody have experience here with that? Well, that's really Wilfred. You're an instructor. That definitely is your path.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it would only, if you had a tech role period, it would only help you get a software engineer role. If you think about anybody come from a boot camp, we all come from different backgrounds. So that enough is to say that you can come from any role and get into another role. But if you are already in a tech role, that's only going to benefit you because they're going to try to use that to guide you into a specific role, as Ann was talking about. So I don't think it's going to, take away from you getting that role. It's only going to help you, or it's just going to balance out. There's no negatives to it.
Yeah, I think there are some companies that have like that stepping stone. So like maybe if you don't really do well on the technical interview for like a developer or engineer role, then you can come in as like a support engineer or something like that. So I think like Datadog has something like that where you can kind of come in as a support engineer and then make that way into an actual like engineer role. I think them, and then GitLab, which is a remote company. I think they do something like that as well. So if you're not ready to pursue an engineering role, but you want to get your feet wet, look at companies that have like support type roles, because often most of the time that's like your stepping stone into an actual like engineer or developer role.
I think it's also how you sell the role, right? So if you are in a role where it's, half client facing, half technical, and you really want to move over to the technical side, talk about all the technical stuff that you do. And at the same time, engineers, at least at at Discovery, or the people that I've come in contact with, they really appreciate people who do have a background in talking to clients or talking to anybody, right? Because communication isn't necessarily the strongest suit of engineers. So being able to communicate, I would say, is a huge plus. So just like know your audience and know, when to really leverage that versus when to really leverage the tech side, I think is really important. And then you can also, I actually did this. You can also ask companies to change your title. Some of them might be open to it. Some of them might not be. So if you want to be known instead of a web developer as a software engineer, I mean, if the company's small enough, they might change it for you, or they might allow you to change it on LinkedIn and call yourself a software engineer. I've heard of some companies doing that if it's really that important. But I really think it's more so how you sell the role that you're currently in.
I think I want to offer a bit of a foil. I agree with like everything everyone said, and I don't think there's no cost. There's a small cost, right? One is what Anne pointed to, of recruiters first targeting her for the thing that she had done prior. So like if like I had to turn down marketing roles after I finished boot camp, because I'd been doing marketing and communications work, and then I was like, cool, now I know how to code too. People were like, oh, do you want to come do like marketing operations management? And I was like, no. But like there were still are recruiters reaching out to me about like marketing and communication sort of roles. And like there is just that like your energy in some way and how the box people pre-sort you into is a little wrong. And so you have to make the effort to say, hey, I know I'm in this box, but I also can be in that box. And I in fact want to be. So like that's really true with things that are like in a different sort of space from like the tech arm of a tech company. Whereas like a QA engineer, there might be limited mobility to like move out of QA if you want to move into web inside of the same company. The important part of this though is that it won't make it impossible for you to change gears. Like you might have to you will be spending your time doing that other function, which is time that you're not spending getting better at like code and software development. So like that is sometime you'll be losing around that you'll make up when you're re-interviewing. But like most of us, people who go to boot camps are usually in the process of changing careers anyway. At worst, it's another career switch. And like you might have to do a new sort of like re-immersion in software like when you are swapping again, but like it'll be all right.
This is facts. All right. So I have one question personally. What do you feel like the boot camp, what do you wish they would have taught you? What do you feel like was left off the plate that could have helped you, get to your destination at the job that much quicker? And this isn't, talk BS about our boot camps, just like, maybe helpful criticism.
I don't know if my answer is specifically targeted at boot camps, but boot camps will be like open source, but they don't actually tell you why. The why of the benefit of engaging with open source is that you are practicing the skill that you're more likely to actually use in a software engineering role. Most of the work you do as a full-time software engineer isn't writing new code. It's understanding existing code and changing it. And so like the benefit of working through and like reading open source projects or writing things in open source projects is that you build that skill. Someone else wrote this. I understand what it does well enough to change it without breaking it. Also write tests. Write tests. Don't write software without tests.
Yeah, that was gonna be what I said, was write tests. With Flatiron School, a lot of the code that you write in each of your labs are test driven. And you're basically just passing the test and then refactoring as needed. I wish that they had a section in the program on writing tests, because that is all I do every day. Like my teammate and I were writing tests for React Native today. We've been doing it all week, these regression tests, and we're splitting hairs trying to figure out why something is not working, you know, and it's crazy. But writing tests is a great skill, because now you write the test and you document your code for the next person that comes in and looks at it, and you're making sure that you're writing it that it makes sense, because who wants to come in and look at code and not understand what's going on 2, 3, 4, not even months, years later?
Comments save lives.
I don't know. Now I'm not really sure, because I keep hearing this, like, don't write comments, write better tests, or write methods or functions that make sense that you don't have to write a comment for. I don't know. The case is still out on comments, but that's another story.
It depends on the language and the tooling. I don't commit comments usually, but I also work in Ruby. Like Go is a different language where it automatically pulls and formats all of your comments into documentation.
That's
so like
amazing.
Tests are very important. Only 2 candidates for Discovery, when I was interviewing, wrote tests. It was me and then this other person, and we were the only 2 that got hired. So tests are very important.
And Wilfred, do y'all have anything from like a boot camp experience you feel like, maybe besides tests that they could have gave to you?
Yeah, for me, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, it was, I guess, like algos. They went over algos and they gave us like a way to study for them. But there's so much to learn about data structures, and there's so many questions that could be asked. It's very overwhelming. So I wish that, and it took me a while to figure out what format worked for me to study and prep myself for these interviews. And that took a while, and I wish that they focused a little bit more on how to organize yourself so it doesn't become overwhelming, and you're not just doing these algo questions just to do them in hopes that somebody in the interview asks you the same question. So I think like really understanding how to approach those as a whole would have been nice.
Yeah, I don't think anything outside of what was already said is something I can add. But one thing I would know is like boot camps are a short time period, right? It's like 3 to 4 months, sometimes a little bit longer. So it's a lot to cram into those few months. And if you add more things, you lose context on the things that you were trying to learn within that time, because you're rushing through it to get more content. But yeah, tests are definitely something important that I didn't really take time to learn, because the bootcamp didn't focus too much on it until I got to my job. And then learning how to work on someone else's code is something that I personally would just say you learn on the job. But as Derek said, I guess that would be something that would be super important to know beforehand, because you know all these things, you know how to create a project, you know how to do all these changes, and then you get to work on some other company's project that's like 10 times the size of your project, and you haven't written anything of it, and you have to start from day one learning how to contribute. So yeah, just doing that, and hopefully, I guess, having like an open source project within the bootcamp would help.
Awesome, man. Well,
Yeah.
I want to say thank you to everyone for providing the experiences, the advice, the lessons learned, everything. We really need it to keep the community growing and learning. Mm-hmm. This is very much needed. So thank you not only to the panelists, but for the attendees. And once again, I implore everybody to go out and vote for your local councilman. Definitely go out there, get into the absentee voting, and let's make some real change. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy your nights.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.